Welcome back in, everyone, here to Full Circle Florida. Back with our panel this week, Ryan Gorman, Janelle Irwin-Taylor, and of course, Dr. Susan McManus. This week, two of Donald Trump's influential backers on social media had what some people called a meltdown over early voting numbers in Pennsylvania. Mike Cernovich put out on X, I've never heard of this guy, but apparently he's big in the Trump circle, quote, "Mail turnout in Pennsylvania for Trump has been a disaster. Unless things change, Kamala Harris takes PA and it's over." Politico did an analysis showing a 10-point gender gap in early voting. NBC News put out something, 58 million mail-in and early in-person votes across the country, 54% breaking for women. 54% came from women. And Dr. McManus, you just recently did this pretty in-depth research paper on this, on the so-called gender gap. What did you find on the national level and how that could play out down ballot?
Well, first of all, we really focused on Florida, but here, like everywhere else, and since 1972, more women have registered and turned out than men. That's nothing new. It's the gap, which right now in Florida is about 8% more women registered than men. But what's fascinating, and this is where some of it goes wrong, if you look at within women, the idea is they all are alike. No, in Florida, we are very unique. Right now in this state, it's like 36% Republican, 35% Democrat, 20-some% no party affiliation. The idea that all these women are going to vote for Harris or all vote against Trump, It couldn't be further from the truth.
I also caution people to dig too deep into these early voting numbers, because we don't know who voted how. Just because more Democrats turned out or more Republicans turned out, that could mean a variety of different things. And part of this election, especially at the presidential level, hinges on some of that kind of cross-party vote, for Democrats anyways, Republicans who are fed up with Trump. So, and there's also coalitions that there's a give and take. Harris, you could make the same argument that she's underperforming among black male voters. So do they cancel each other out? So, I mean, I just wouldn't get too into the weeds on those numbers.
It's a fascinating topic, because are we at the point in America where no demographic is a monolith anymore? People vote the way they vote based on whatever their reality is, not because of the color of their skin or their gender.
That's the reason you see Florida is more diverse than any other state in terms of that, in our race and ethnicity, and certainly in our generation. I mean, 35% of Floridians are, the two youngest generations, and over a third of our registrants are persons of color.
Ryan, what are you hearing on your show?
I mean, there's a lot of enthusiasm to vote. I think it's going to be a high turnout election. That seems like that's maybe one thing that you could take away from the early voting. But in terms of getting too deep into it, to Janelle's point, if you're trying to compare it to 2020, well, Democrats were really pushing heavy for early voting then. Republicans weren't. You had a big day of vote. So there are just a lot of different factors at play.
I'm fascinated by that, because I was just thinking about it. I mean, will more men vote for Harris versus more women voting for Trump? And could that be a potential vortex that defines the election? I know I'm getting back into defining things with gender, but they are trying to play to those two camps. We've seen it on both sides of the campaign. Trump with women, you could argue maybe not as efficiently, but Harris certainly with men.
I think that's something that we're seeing a little bit more in Florida because of the presence of Amendment 4 on the ballot, the abortion measure. So you see a lot of people who are supporting Amendment 4 really going and pushing for the male vote by saying, think about your wife, think about your sister, think about your aunt, your friends, whoever. So there is, and the Post-it note thing is really fascinating, putting them in truck stops of all places to say, hey guys, your vote is private. You have the freedom to do this. So
but the irony is, on the polls that we have right now on Amendment 3 and 4, there's no gender gap on the amendments. And that's because the micro-targeting of the ads on both sides of those issues have been very effective.
I'm also interested in the whole married couple thing. Like how many people vote, they're married, they vote different ways, men and women, or is there
there was that pro-Harris ad that was narrated by Julia Roberts, where it was basically a message to women, you can do what you want in the privacy of the voting booth, which angered conservatives, to put it mildly.
This insult comic that I had never heard of at Madison Square Garden, he gave the Trump campaign a headache with the garbage comment. Then Biden drops the ball with Harris with his own garbage comments. I don't understand these undisciplined errors in these final days of the campaign. In the end, is this a 24-hour fever that breaks and it doesn't mean anything at the end of the day, or does this siphon off some votes?
It just comes down to the fact that near the end, everybody's saying things before they think, the old saying about that. But one thing we do know is that the anger and the negativity of it, for many, many voters, the joy of this election has long gone.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, stakes are high.
So in Pennsylvania, there is a pretty large contingent of Puerto Rican voters who it looks like have been influenced by this. There's been some high-profile endorsements for Harris since that within the celebrity Puerto Rican community. What I think is fascinating is that on the Trump side of it, criticizing Biden for his comments, the people that feel like they were insulted by Biden, they were already voting for Trump. So if it moved the needle in one way, I'm not sure it moved the needle in the other way also.
I talked to a major Hispanic talk show host about this, and he said, there's some anger in the community, what he's been hearing. Sure. And I think here in Florida, and you could attest to this, Dr. McManus, Osceola County would be the one to keep an eye on to see if there's any kind of movement. A third Puerto Rican in that county. And so, if the numbers look a little different when Florida comes in, maybe that's an indicator for what we could see in Pennsylvania.
I want to fit this one question in before we go. Do you think Florida will ever be a swing state again? Any data out there that suggests this state would be competitive again with Florida Democrats, Florida Republicans?
It has to do with 100% with the young voters, because so many of them right now are NPAs, but they could be swayed in one direction or another. And historically, we know that when parties start losing, they tend to come to the middle and moderate and change their profile.
Not expecting any surprises on Election Day when it comes to Florida red, Florida blue.
No. I think the most interesting thing is going to be the amendments.
But long term, there's a pendulum and it always swings. The question is not if it swings, it's when it swings.
The tides always change eventually. All right. Thank you for being here this week. I appreciate it. Of course, we'll be seeing you throughout the week as well. Still to come on Full Circle Florida, our final thoughts on this last week of the campaign and the pivotal week ahead. So they're not going anywhere. They'll be back for one more little segment. Stay with me.